Well, good evening, everyone. I hope you all are doing well. Thank you again for your flexibility with the fact that we weren't able to meet in person today for class. But I do hope that this presentation, these slides are going to help fill you in on some of the additional things I wanted to cover for your upcoming poster project. All right, so continuing our discussion on typography and also color personas. One of the things that I thought was helpful last time was us being able to actually critique some previous work. And so I thought we could start off by doing that again. Again, our two clients, we have Donna's Dress Shop and then the KU Center for Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity. So here is Donna's Dress Shop, the homepage again, and here are three student examples. And if you take a minute and just look at these, so kind of doing the same thing that we were doing on Tuesday, just taking a look and seeing what works and what could be improved. So if you want to pause the video and take a minute to look that over, that's great. I'll go ahead and walk through these. So I would say the best version here is number one, because not only does it have great hierarchy, but it also is taking a good approach with selecting fonts that match the persona of the dress shop. And it also just does a nice job with keeping everything organized and really easy to read. Example number two, obviously, there are some issues there. The primary issue is that warmer colors tend to come to the forefront. They are going to be the most noticeable, and cooler colors, like we see with the blue here, actually recede into the background. So if we were wanting our text to be the thing that pops out the most and grabs our attention, we would actually want to reverse it so that the background will be blue and the text will be pink. On top of that, the challenge is made even worse here by having that text and those shapes outlined with the yellow. Again, yellow is a warmer color, so it is causing us to have even more difficulty with reading what that text is supposed to say. Our third example here is there are a few things that are working well with it in terms of just the color selection is not bad actually, and there are the font that's used. I could see how that script font might be incorporated, but the primary issue here is, we have these white lines, these white horizontal lines that are going through the poster, and also our stars, our starbursts there have been enlarged, which is kind of going against the instructions for this assignment. We don't necessarily want you to experiment or change too much the graphics. So those have been obviously increased to a larger size, and then they still have that white background, which is very distracting. So hopefully those are some good tips to keep in mind as we're looking at these examples. Now moving to our second client, we have the Office of DEI and Belonging. And again, we're preparing a poster for their upcoming panel on talking about disability issues. So here are our previous student examples. Going left to right on this. Again, if you want to pause the video, take a minute to see what you notice, that's great. But let's go ahead and look at number one. So this student has decided to change the color scheme to match with KU's brand color palette, which is that's totally fine, not a bad idea. Kind of updates it to fit with the larger university branding. But the main issue here is that we are dealing with some alignment issues. So you can see that especially the text in the bottom section has all kinds of different alignment. We could simplify that by just making them all left aligned, and then making sure that they kind of match up with each other. There are also some issues with spacing. So if you notice on both the left and the right side of the bottom, our two text boxes there are really hugging the edge and don't really give us much in terms of spacing or breathing room with that. So again, those would be simple fixes, things we could do to improve the overall look of that. Number two, so this one, we have, it looks like there is an attempt here at kind of creating that modular type of design, which is where you might have different boxes that that each fulfill a purpose that contains some kind of information, which is a good approach generally, but here things are again not really aligned. There's not a lot of balance or structure to it, and we have these kind of red outlines which don't really add a whole lot to the overall design. The other thing that this person has done is added kind of this black line with the drop shadow under disability inclusion panel. And that's the only thing that has a drop shadow. So it's a little bit puzzling kind of what that's doing there. It doesn't really fit necessarily with the rest of the design. And then the last thing I would say is that there's just a lack of hierarchy with this one too, right? So if we want the disability inclusion panel title to stand out, then that would really work better at a much larger text size. And then same thing with information down here, just bolding or increasing the text size of those subheads could really help draw a distinction between that and the following text. Our third one is actually really well done, has a good sense of hierarchy. It's combining a slab serif font, which is good for titles and headlines, with a more sans serif font, kind of has that more modern look, but it's easy to read. And our shapes, our modules down here, this is a good example of how to use that kind of modular design. Our colors of those boxes match perfectly with the circular graphics that we see above. So there's a nice kind of cohesion and unity to the design. So overall, this one does a pretty good job. And we even see in the body copy down below that there is a variation in the text size, with the paragraph on the left being the most important information, and then it kind of scales down from there with the panelists and additional info. So nicely done on that one. All right, so let's go ahead and do a quick refresher on AM, one of the concepts that we talked about on Tuesday. And this acronym can really help us to just keep in mind what it is that we're shooting for with our posters. So again, the A stands for audience. We want to think about who are we trying to reach with this design. Our message is, what message are we trying to convey through the words in our design and also the visuals. And then lastly, the medium. So what format are we designing for? Of course, in this case, we are designing for a poster, which is going to have different considerations than other type of platforms like websites, magazines, etc. So let's dive a little bit more into what each of these represents. So if we are considering our audience, again, this is thinking about who are we designing for. And with this, we want to consider both demographics and psychographics. So the difference there is demographics is going to be anything that is just factual information about a certain audience segment. So this could be, things that you're used to filling out on a form about yourself. Might be like your age, your location, different things that we could just say are factually true about you. Same goes for the larger audience. Psychographics, on the other hand, are going to be those things that really inform us about an audience's lifestyles, their behaviors, some of the choices they make, if they are into certain products or they have certain behaviors. Those kinds of things would fit into that category. So it's really important to bring both of those into the mix. And lastly, we want to avoid any kind of stereotyping when it might come to gender and age. And this next slide really shows you an example of that. So here we have a graphic, kind of a fun graphic of a grandma who enjoys surfing. So she's out surfing, and we see the kind of the joy and the fun that she's experiencing just from like her expression there. So this illustration does a good job of kind of like highlighting what it says. Life is just beginning. So it's really kind of embracing that idea of getting out there and surfing and being adventurous, even if this person is a little bit later in life. So the thing we would want to stress about this is you can see there with the text that it's kind of laid out in a fun, more adventurous type of font that matches the overall mood of what this is going for. And so the difference here is if we were stereotyping based on age, then think like, okay, grandmas are our audience, so therefore we might have a more old-fashioned looking type of font or typeface. Well, because we are wanting to encapsulate kind of that playful fun feeling, this is a much better option in this case. So a couple other examples I wanted to share with you. These are taken from Sidley Agency, which does all kinds of corporate branding work. And I just wanted to show you, like for this, they did a whole rebranding with Gerber, which, you know, as a company, if you're familiar with it, they make all kinds of baby food and different types of products for from newborns all the way up to preschool age kids. So they've actually been around for 90 years, a very like trusted company that has a long tradition of serving this audience. But they also realized that they needed to update their designs and their branding in order to fit the current time. So they worked with the agency, and there are some things about the colors and the type that they chose here that I want to emphasize. And so the first is that they stuck with the trademark blue that Gerber has always had. And so one of the things that we know about blue, the color in general, is that it can often be used to represent stability and safety. And so that would obviously be really important with a brand like Gerber, because they want to stress that they've been around a long time, they have that credibility, but also for the parents who are buying their products, they can really have faith and be reassured that Gerber is producing the best type of products, the best type of food that's going to be most nutritious, and they're really concerned about safety for this young audience. So that's part of why they would have chosen blue as a primary color here. The second thing I want to emphasize too is, you know, up here they have this dark navy blue background, but they have these different icons, and you see kind of almost a rainbow color scheme here, which suggests kind of a fun, playful side, and also represents the fact that they are producing these products for children. And so I like the colors they've chosen here because it really conveys that idea while not being you know, too loud or distracting. They figured out how to make it kind of its own color palette that feels very cohesive. And then the last thing I would emphasize is that we can see here that they use slab serifs for their typeface selection. And one thing that we can know about slab serifs is that they typically work well for headlines. They're easy to read, and overall they convey a sense of strength, stability, and an authoritative tone. So again, those things would be, you know, kind of similar to why they use the color blue. They really just want to show that they have credibility in this area, and that they really are a stable company that you can turn to if you're a parent for good advice and quality products. All right, one more example from Sidley Agency. So this is for the North Face. This was a particular campaign that they put together called Move Mountains, and the idea behind the campaign was that they wanted to feature strong women who were out in the world doing amazing things, who had that kind of sense of adventure, and to just really highlight their stories. And so you can see some of the different content they put together here. So a couple of things I would point out in terms of color and type selections. One is that you can see red used kind of throughout the content. And we know that red conveys a sense of strength and energy. And then when red is combined with black, that can be very bold and attention grabbing. So that feels appropriate and right in line for what they're going for here, which is, again, to convey the strength and the power that these women have to be able to get out there and change the world in positive ways. So those colors work really well in this context. And then as far as type, they are using a sans serif here that is very much in line with the type of branding that you see from North Face in general. And one thing we know about sans serifs is that they are modern and direct, and they typically work well at smaller and larger sizes. So easy to read, kind of convey that modern feel. And with this idea of featuring contemporary women who are making a difference in the world, that idea of modernity and just kind of direct, impactful messaging really makes sense for this particular campaign. All right, moving on to our next piece of criteria. So the message. And the message is really important for the design. So questions we want to be asking when we think about the message are, what is our intention what do we hope our audience will do as a result of hearing our message? So examples might include, do we want them to buy something? Do we want them to attend an event like we have with our poster examples? Are we trying to get them to hire us? Are we sending them job application information and our resume? Is that the purpose of our messaging? So really, we want to ask that question to be able to help guide the overall shape of our content. And then the other thing that we would say is that we want to think about how our message can also consider the tone of our design. So depending on the client and the situation, again, we might want it to be more business-like, or it could be more playful, serious, upbeat. And you can see from these examples in this image, how different fonts can sort of convey those different types of ideas, right? All right, so here's a good example. This was a poster designed by well-known designer Jacqueline Casey to get people on board for giving blood. It's part of a campaign at MIT. And this is just an incredible poster design. And one of the things that I noticed after looking at this for a while is that the I here and the L, so it's using perfect alignment, and that's actually intended to represent a needle. And then down here, we have a single red square that's meant to symbolize a drop of blood. So the drop of blood is coming from the needle we see here. And not only is that, kind of another layer of how type can be also an image, but this red box down here is used to help bring our eye to this secondary information with the date and the location, all that. But again, we know about sans serifs that they are direct and impactful. So again, this is a good choice. And also, she's obviously using contrast with the red and the white on the black background to really bring our attention to it. And the typeface that she's using is Helvetica, which is one of the most common kinds of sans serifs out there. But again, it can help to convey that modern type of messaging. All right. Next example, this is a book that was put out recently called She Surf, and this is really focusing on the idea of women who are in surfing. And so you can see here this is a great photograph, obviously, but think about how the colors and the type are chosen here to convey that sense of women surfing or just surfing in general. So one thing that stands out is that the designer used the exact color of red from her wetsuit that she's wearing to fill in the title and the subtitle there. But then also the font that was used is one that's called Berg. So you can see what the letter forms look like here. There's a lot of different weights, but even in looking at this typeface, I mean, look at the letter form with the F that's shown here. So you can almost see with the top part of that letter form how it sort of mimics that idea of an ocean wave, right? So we see that represented here in this photo, and there's also other characteristics with this particular font that also help to kind of reinforce that idea of surfing. So think about that. Again, we want to remember that typefaces aren't just there to represent words. They can also be part of imagery and conveying an overall aesthetic. Okay, then our last category to consider is the medium. So what medium are we designing for? Poster, a resume, a website. And then once we've answered that question, we can move to our second question, which is what typefaces will be legible and readable and appropriate for the size of the medium. So could be that you might have a typeface that is going to work really well at a big size on a poster, but maybe that's going to be a little too much or not necessary to have on a resume, which might have much smaller type sizes, and the information you're conveying doesn't need to be read from across a room. Rather, you just want it to be easy to read for whoever is viewing the piece of paper or viewing it online, right? So those are things to take into account, and we can kind of see an example here. This is a previous student's work, and they looked at, building this series of posters for CAPS, which is the Counseling and Psychological Services. And so think about just looking at this, how the choices of color each represent each of the moods that are shown here. So that red really ties into that idea of being anxious. And we've talked about before how blue represents, kind of, it can be indicating melancholy or depression, sadness. When you have the blues, those are the kinds of feelings that we would associate with it. So this is a good example of using both color, and then the type is again very direct, using that sans serif. And the sense of hierarchy is really strong too, because it captures our attention with a single word, and then leads into the secondary information down at the bottom, which most of that is in a smaller type size. So that's a great example. So here is another kind of pro tip that I would suggest when you're thinking about how to design a layout. We would say a general rule of thumb is to not use more than 2 on a document. And if you're really skilled and brave, you can do 3 max. But again, that might complicate things a little bit. So if you have more experience with type design, go for it. But your life is probably going to be a little bit easier by just sticking to a couple of different fonts. And this is an example of what we want to avoid. So you don't want to do this. This graphic has actually 4 different typefaces that are being used: Times New Roman, Arial, Optima, and Crunch. So there's a lot going on here. It makes it feel less cohesive. It makes things feel more disorganized. And so really, in this case, we could improve it just by reducing it down to a couple of different fonts. So when another approach that you could take to this, you could do a couple of different font selections, or this question might come up where you say, can I use just one font? And sometimes that is enough to create enough variation in your design to make it interesting, but still make it feel consistent and cohesive. So some fonts have many different versions of weights in their family. And so an example would be Helvetica, like we see here. So the top title there is, in a Helvetica bold. Then we see the regular version of Helvetica below that. But there are so many different weights to Helvetica that you could combine those different weights, and it would still create an interesting sense of contrast and variation that would be similar to what you would have from combining a couple of different fonts of different styles. So here's a good example of kind of what those different weights look like for Helvetica, from ultralight all the way to heavy black. And so you can see how combining one of these weights at the bottom here, like combining this bold, heavier black with the lighter end of the spectrum here, that could really create a nice sense of contrast and also help you out with the overall idea of hierarchy. Here's another example from a graphic that was put together for a music concert. And the idea I want to stress here is, you see with the Lazy Dog font there, that's kind of has a more illustrative quality to it, like an artist may have sketched that, and so that's nice because it's attention getting. It fits the personality of the band that we're talking about here, and it just gives it a sense of character, right? But on the other hand, would this be a good font to lay out the secondary information that we're trying to communicate? No, because it would be really difficult to read, and it would obviously take away from the message that we're trying to communicate. So you can see here that they have paired this illustrative font with a sans serif that is going to be, it's all in the same font, but again, it's using those different weights to emphasize the message and still make it readable and have that sense of contrast. Okay, let's take a look at which option gives us the most creative flexibility. So I'm going to show you a few different choices here. Looking here, this is option A. So this is all one font with different weights. So keep this in mind. Then we'll go here to option B. You can see the difference here is obviously that there's a lot more variation between the weights. So we have kind of bolder choices in font versus lighter choices. And this is showing you the different sides of or the different weights to Acumen, which is a popular sans serif font. And you can see that there are many different weights. So it really incorporates a lot of different styles. And so that is a popular font choice because you can create so much variation with it. And then you can have an option like this, which has kind of more subtle variations in the different weights. Looking at this, can you pick out the different variations that exist here? These are pretty similar, but there are some slight differences. So another way we could think about typography selections is by looking at different resume options. So when you're putting together a resume, you want to consider your personality, right? You want to represent yourself with a particular type of design that's going to communicate something about who you are and what you value. We also want to have that sense of hierarchy on our page. So the same is absolutely true for poster typography. And so that's why this is relevant to this project. So take a look at some of these different resumes and just consider what is the personality that each of these is trying to project. So first of all, this one, if we were to take a look, so this we would say has a good sense of alignment and is really using kind of more modern, a modern typeface. And so we would say this resume is pretty sophisticated. This person maybe has kind of a more modern aesthetic. And so those would be some of the main takeaways just by looking at this. Okay, how about this one? Here we have, again, a good sense of alignment, but now we've got some color shading that's brought into it. And we can see that this has a lot of structure to it and a sense of architecture, which then if we look at the content, this actually is an architect. So you can kind of see how it almost resembles a building, right? Just with the way things are laid out and the horizontal and the vertical structure to it. So this actually is a nice representation of somebody who is going into the field of architecture. All right, how about this CV? In this case, we have a lot more kind of icons that are being used, as we see up here with the info. But then we've got this kind of journey that's being mapped out, and then below, lots of different icons and symbols to represent kind of her different software skills, the languages that she speaks, and her expertise. And so we can see that her work experience is as a designer, and it looks like she is involved in different types of design. She's got a lot of good software experience. And so this actually is kind of a more creative approach, but I think it conveys the creativity that she would bring to the table with any potential employer. All right, this one. So now we've got some color that we see here, and that really draws our eyes to that particular section of the resume. So we can see like, okay, PS, we know that's Photoshop if we're in this kind of creative field, AI, Adobe Illustrator, ID, InDesign, and so on. And so then we can take a closer look and see that this person is a highly ambitious designer with hopes of improving urban issues through design. So definitely a more kind of artistic, modern approach to the design. So again, that's pretty representative of who this person is. This one, so this person is looks like they are in a graduate from several different architecture programs. So again, we see that strong sense of structure, right, and alignment, both with the lines that are used, but also where the text is aligned. And so again, very appropriate for an architect. Maybe wouldn't be as good a fit for someone in a different, more kind of creative or unconventional type of role. And then this one, so we've got a lot of color going on here. This person is an architectural designer. So we can see there is a sense of structure with these different elements and lines being used that works pretty well, but there's definitely a lot more color that's being brought into it. And so it looks like maybe this person is trying to emphasize just the variety of things that they can do or the creativity that they might have as an architect. Okay, moving on to our looking at some different types of fonts. And Again, this is a way to look at a font and be able to characterize it among the 6 basic classifications of type. So our first one there, we would say this is a script font, kind of like you would see with any kind of calligraphy. Of course, we have our sans serif number 2. Number 3 is a novelty font. So that really encapsulates a big category of fonts, basically anything that doesn't fit into any of our other categories. Slab serif is going to be our 4th category represented there, like we've seen in some other examples. Great for titles, for headlines, pretty easy to read, pretty authoritative. Our next one would be our serif fonts. Again, that's going to represent kind of a more traditional look. A lot of times serif fonts will be used for copy that has a lot of small text sizes, or if a lot of books will use serif fonts because it's real easy for us to read quickly. And then last we have the modern serif. So that's going to be just more of an update on your traditional serif. Sometimes those are going to have kind of more weights to them and give you a little more to work with in terms of contrast and variation. So here are some different examples. These are the names for these particular fonts that you can see. So maybe you're familiar with some of these, but all these are pretty common with each of these categories that are used by a lot of designers. All right, so if these are examples of novelty choices of fonts, so we see a lot of different options here. And if we were to kind of pair these fonts with a different type of restaurant, what would you think when you look at these? So, maybe with number 1 kind of gives you that Western type of vibe. So maybe it's like an old-fashioned saloon, kind of has that Western theme to it. We've got this chalk font number 2, so maybe like more of a cafe. This third one, more kind of a script font, so maybe that's a little more kind of locally crafted or artisanal type of approach. Number 4, rock chalk. This font is going to be something that looks a little more modern, but also has some kind of playful character to it. So maybe they're doing things that are a little more creative. And then our last one there, that one has just a lot going on with kind of a more rustic feeling to it. And so maybe that is more of a traditional restaurant. You could see that maybe working for maybe it's like an Italian type of restaurant that would be representing that typical or that type of letter forms. So here are the names of each of those, and you can see what those names are in case you're interested in looking into those fonts more, seeing how they're used by different designers. If we had something like a script font, these are some different options you might consider, right? And each of them are going to symbolize different things, have a different feel to them. And here are the names of those particular fonts. All right, so basically that's it for today. What I want you to take away is just keeping in mind how different colors and font selections can really convey different aspects of personality. So as you are working on these poster assignments, just keep in mind what we were talking about in terms of audience and our messaging and our medium, and I think you guys will be in great shape. So thanks again for watching. Hope you guys have a great weekend. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions or would like some feedback on those poster assignments. And again, remember, next week, April 12th, if you turn in a draft of one of your posters, then that is an opportunity to earn 5 points extra credit. So have a good one. Look forward to seeing you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.